Welcome to this week's episode of the Caregivers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropaleski, and you can call me Dr. Mark. Today, we're talking about what happens when caregiving pulls a family back into everything it has never fully resolved. When a parent gets sick, the crisis is never just medical. Old roles return, old conflicts come back into the room. Siblings may disagree about what happened in the family, who was hurt, who was protected, who was expected to help, and who got to leave. And often one person becomes the caregiver while everyone else has opinions about how it should be done. This conversation is about the person who stays, the person trying to keep care moving inside a family that may already be fractured by estrangement, resentment, politics, gender expectations, or years of painful history. Our guest today is Angela Caldwell, a licensed marriage and family therapist who works with high-conflict families and who understands what happens when care, obligation, grief, and old family roles collide. And before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe or follow the Caregivers podcast wherever you're listening. It's completely free, and it's one of the best ways to support the show and help these conversations reach more caregivers who need them. Angela Caldwell, welcome to the Caregivers podcast. We're so happy you're here to join us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited.
Well, in the tradition of the podcast, we're just going to jump right in. So, Angela, I think a lot of caregivers go into a family crisis hoping that everyone will finally show up, but then the old pattern returns almost instantly. The responsible one takes charge, the avoidant one disappears, the critic starts criticizing. What does caregiving bring back into those old roles?
I might prefer to look at your question more that these crises actually highlight what the roles are. So it's interesting if you think of daily life in a family on a regular Tuesday, your roles don't necessarily announce themselves when you're fixing lunch for the day or when you're getting chores done or coming home from work or something like that. It's in these emergencies and crises that the roles emerge. And so we will find that, every family defines a crisis and emergency differently. In probably what medical professionals would consider real emergencies, like a health crisis or something like that. The roles will emerge. Like you said, you will find that everyone will not be surprised who the leader is, and everyone will not be surprised who the Debbie Downer is. And so it's we talk in terms of these old roles, and it's funny because I notice in the family therapy that I do, we use this term a lot. I have this old role in my family. It's old in that it was instilled a long time ago, but it is quite current. We don't do a lot of role updating in families, and in fact, who wants to do that? I want to go to work, and I want to go swimming on Saturday, and I want to go to Disneyland. I want to do all these other things with my time. It doesn't occur to us to say, it's probably time to update my role in my family, first of all. Secondly, you don't have much of an audience with a family. Can you imagine going to your family and saying, hey guys, can we sit down and update our family roles? They'd look at you like you were two-headed monster from Jupiter. And so these old roles that we have, they emerge because we don't do a very good job restructuring our family as we transition through the different life stages and different stages of family development.
So it's almost as though the crisis brings it back on to the much more conscious level and almost like a big flashing reminder sign.
Yes. Yeah. It's an illuminator. Yeah.
So a medical crisis then asks of an adult child to step into some serious role as a caregiver. But inside the family, that same person may still be treated either as the responsible one or the peacekeeper or the one who can't say no. What does that do to a caregiver who has spent years actually trying to outgrow that role if they've been making those efforts and then suddenly they're pulled back into it?
What a beautiful question. I imagine so many of your listeners are saying, yes. What do I do when I worked so hard, either in therapy or with my pastor or doing yoga? I don't care. Whatever I did, that I worked so hard to change the way I operate, to not be the person who always says yes, or not be the rescuer, not be the person who always helps the family. And now here I am, and
Bang,
nobody else is doing
back.
it. And it's all back. And here I am. This is, at the risk of getting a little psychobabbly, I wish that more of us would look at those opportunities not as being sucked back into our old role because of the things we are doing, but rather that these are things that need to be done in all families everywhere, and you can do them differently now. Now you can approach your role differently. If you think about a caretaker, if we had time, we could probably come up with 6 or 7 different templates of different kinds of caretakers, different approaches to caregiving. So when we want to be careful not to confuse our old family role with the task of caregiving, the small day-to-day tasks like medication management and coordinating doctor's appointments and hygiene and personal care and things like that. Those are things, if you think about in the old days, medieval times, big castles that had servants. And the servants were responsible for caretaking. They didn't all have the same personality. They didn't all have the same quirks and tendencies. You could have 7 different maids approach the making of a bed in 7 different ways, right? So rather than give into this urge to feel yourself, oh no, I'd worked so hard to get out of this role. Yes, you did. Rather than that, celebrate that you have made quite a lot of progress. And now you approach this task, this mundane task of the condition of being human. Now you approach it differently from this new person that you are. Just because you're doing the handiwork of caretaking doesn't mean that you have regressed or gone back and adopted your old ways of being.
I just thinking about that scenario, I can feel the pull. I can almost feel it in the room. So how do we avoid that? How do we redefine our new way in that moment if we're conscientious of what we've accomplished so far to grow and develop from that original role that was established in the family perhaps years and years ago? But when we're feeling the pull, what's the strategy that we can employ in that moment? Is it just a reassertion, or is it a big family sit down, or how do we strategize those first steps not to get pulled back? Because it's a strong gravitational force.
It sure is. It sure is. That's a great question. So you will find as you get to know me that I'm a big champion of family meetings. It's one of the first interventions I insist on in my family therapy. I have families have sit down, formal, organized family meetings. And either they are ad hoc, like we need to have a family meeting because we are going through some kind of transitional stage as a family, or we would like to do this more regularly because we have a problem that's going to take a few months to work out, or we're kind of disconnected in our different lives and we need to sit down and have a time that we all connect. But I am a big fan of family meetings. When a family member suffers some kind of medical crisis and they are in need, and the family structure and routine is going to have to change, this marks a transition. Most families struggle with a transition. In fact, when people say, what kinds of families do I work with in my practice? Almost always families in transition. It's families transitioning to a new chapter of life, something different that's happening that marks a change from the norm. So this would be a big one. This would be a family in transition. What makes family life so difficult is not all the quirks and personalities and frustrations and old wounds that you have from family members. What makes family life so difficult is that we are not very good at transitions as humans. And what we do is we establish, unconsciously, a family dance, an interaction pattern that's a way of being when children are first introduced into the picture. And we don't update that. So I want you to think about kind of the different stages of family development. If you go from being new parents to toddlers and infants, we establish patterns and routines and a division of labor. And when those children grow up and now we are parents of, say, elementary school children, we don't adapt very well. We don't have a family meeting and sit down and say, hey, things have changed. We're going to rearrange the power agreement. We're going to rearrange responsibilities and the division of labor and chores. We're going to rearrange how we talk to each other. I have new expectations of you now. We don't do a good job of that. I encourage families to do a better job of that, to identify first a transition. Oh, this is a transition. And secondly, sit down and discuss what this means for the family. I know this is a long answer to your question, but I would say the step to have is to be brave about acknowledging that things have officially changed We are going to sit down and we need to look at all of and families can use their own language for this, but we need to look at all of the rules and protocols and procedures that are in place that are outdated, that are no longer going to work here. Maybe if this had happened to my father 10 years ago, I might have been in a better place to handle this. But now I have kids and a full-time job, and now I don't have the capacity that I used to have. I need my siblings, no matter how much emotion and electrical charge is in the room, to sit down and examine the protocols that don't work anymore and establish new protocols. So I guess it's a long-winded way of saying a meeting that acknowledges the transition and the things that need to shift.
I think that really distinguishes some of your work in philosophy in that you bring everybody into the room and you bring the help you need into the room to deal with the family, engaging in that process as opposed to sending everyone else out to their respective therapists and doing their work and then trying to somehow scramble to get their voice re-expressed in the family.
Yes. If you'll give me a tiny little soapbox, I will say this very controversial thing. This is going to get me a lot of emails. Watch, I'm about to get myself in a lot of trouble. Individual therapy, having each family member in individual therapy is the stupidest idea I can think of. That's the dumbest possible way to solve family problems because unless the therapists are having some kind of conference call every day, getting everybody on the same page, if this therapist thinks that we need to work on this and that therapist thinks we need to work on this, therapists can't help but work at cross purposes. That doesn't make any sense, especially in a crisis, especially in a conflict, in a time of transition. Everybody needs to come together. Sure, have your personal therapist, but don't skip the family therapy. Don't skip the part where we're all in the same room. Yes, with all of our emotions and all of our wounds and all of our pain and all of our flaws and all of our deficiencies. Yes, with all of that, bring into the room to solve the problem. I disagree with this idea that you have to solve your own problems before you can go into the family. I vehemently oppose that idea.
So, Angela, in a lot of families, the caregiving conflict isn't only between the parent and the adult child, but it is between the siblings. Why does a parent's illness so often reopen the old sibling story of who was protected, who was blamed, who was expected to help, and who kind of got to leave and extricate themselves?
Yeah, wow. That's a very profoundly deep question you're asking because it raises the question of mortality and time. And I don't know what other therapists will say, but I will tell you my opinion of what's really going on there. We humans may not be good at adapting and transitioning, but you know what we are good at? We are good at denial. We are very good at denial. We are very good at kicking the can down the road. We're very good at delaying solving problems. Our parents, good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, our parents represent a constant in our lives. And if we are lucky enough to go all the way into adulthood and still have living parents, we make a childlike assumption in our unconscious that they'll be around forever. And these old pains and hurt feelings and transgressions of the past, we'll talk about those someday. And then we never define someday. And then the parent falls ill. And when the parent falls ill, every member of the family gets a mortality check. All the siblings feel the pressure of the time. Time is short. Shoot, that someday that I wanted to work this thing out with you that happened when I was 7. That someday that I wanted to work out my anger and discuss with you why you always do this and why I always do this. That someday is impending now. And I think what you're feeling, all those siblings kind of bringing all that stuff forward, I think you're feeling a sense of urgency that was never there before. And it's there now because they can feel the end is near. And so what we do when the end is near is we panic and we blurt out all the things that we sort of stored up all those years for that magical someday that I guess is here now.
And I think those blurted, stored away things actually are reflective of some of the original assigned roles that you may have received, whether it was growing up or in middle adulthood or within the family dynamic, right? And it's almost as though the mortality check, as you call it, is like that sort of spark or catalyst for that revival of the old roles and all of that old stored information. You can see then in the context of the family crisis transitioning to have to come up with a plan to care for someone, which may be complex and maybe under-resourced from the system, that becomes a very challenging situation to work through.
It's also stressful as hell. And the other thing we don't do well under stress is exhibit patience for one another. And so the caregiver is suddenly under-resourced and depleted and really doesn't have the patience for sibling complaints. Other sibling complaints who view a caregiver as controlling and not letting other people help or have a say in what's going on, they also are losing patience because under pressure, under stress, when our systems are flooded with cortisol, we are quick and decisive in ways that can be harmful to family dynamics.
I was thinking about that for a second, it almost makes you wonder whether or not you're pre-selected based on your ability to maintain flow to the prefrontal cortex during times of stress, and that may actually define your role historically in the family because you didn't lose it during times of stress, and then that you became very, very useful member of the family to help navigate crises. But it's not always quite that slick and smooth. When a parent's sick, you might think that the siblings could actually put things aside and focus on the care, but often the old fights take over. Why is it so hard for families just to prioritize mom or dad's immediate needs over the history between them?
That's an age-old question, isn't it? I don't know if Freud ever got the answer to that one. You guys are going to be able to speak with a lot more intelligence to this than I will, but I'll try to offer some 2 cents. Our pain centers are in a dumb part of our brain. So our pain centers are not located in the thinking portion of our brain, right? So those insular reflexes that we have, that limbic system, man, that's a powerful lizard brain, isn't it? It takes over.
It is.
And I liken it to physical pain out in the world, right? So if you're trying to send us some emails out for your boss, and you've got a project to work on, and you stub your toe, you could give 2 shits about those emails. All you care about is the pain in your toe, right? And so we could look at that in a similar way and say, like, gosh, couldn't you put the pain aside to focus on what needed to be done? Not when the pain's big, not when the pain is painful. And I think what you're seeing in those moments, that inability that siblings have to kind of just put it aside, just get the emotion out of the room, is because they're in so much pain. And that pain has been either growing and festering or forgotten and a rude awakening into like, oh yeah, this thing hurts real bad. And so kind of like a stubbed toe or slamming your finger in the car door or something, that pain, when there's an argument between siblings, that insular response, that kind of limbic response takes over the reasonable and rational part of our brain.
Do you go over strategies in therapy for families who are faced with that sort of limbic overdrive to sort of collectively better manage painful discussions?
Yes. Yeah, we triage. So I again, as controversial as this may sound, I actually think we should deal with the stubbed toe immediately and get the stubbed toe or the slammed finger out of the way immediately. So if we are trying, if there's arguments over which care facility to find for an aging parent or something, or there's arguments over how much we should pay, and this one costs $7,000, but that one costs $2,000, but these are the benefits of that, and you're always so controlling, and you never listen to what I say, and you treat me like a child. You've treated me like this since we were kids, and now you see that the pain is rising to the top level. In those moments, we call a timeout, and I say, "Hey, we are not going to be able to decide how much money to spend on what care facility until we can alleviate some of this pain." So what we do is we stop the conversation, and I give them a time, and I say, "Let's allot 20 minutes right now. You're not going to solve the world's problems. You're not going to heal your childhood in 20 minutes, but let's have 20 minutes, not for surgery, for a Band-Aid. What do you need right now to be able to talk about what's best for your mother?" "Well, I need an apology. Well, I need her to acknowledge all the times she..." And then I stop there. "Okay, got it." We go to her. Let's say it's a sister. We go to the sister and we say, "In order for you to make a decision about how much money to spend on a care facility, your sibling needs an apology. This is your moment. This is your moment to put a Band-Aid on this pain. We'll come back to it. We will deal with this later. But if we're going to make a decision, we have to address the pain right now." Now, What that sounds like probably is the equivalent of a first aid kit. So yeah, I do some first aid right there, and so some kind of the medic on the battlefield, heal this pain for a second, with a promise to the hurt party that this will be addressed. We will attend to this once we can make these two decisions that have to be made by Friday.
It sounds like potentially a very effective strategy.
It depends
It really
on how
does.
good I am.
Well, it also depends on what people are willing to bring to the table as well, and
Yes.
they can put some of their vulnerability aside. So thinking of that scenario, Angela, where the phone rings, your parent had a stroke, received a horrible diagnosis, suddenly needs care. In a family where people were already hurt, strained, and maybe barely speaking even, what happens emotionally to that family before anyone can even figure out the care plan?
The most common thing that we see is deflection. And so that there is tremendous fear. There's fear of what this means for us in the immediate days and what this means for us in the coming years. There's tremendous fear. There's fear about my parents' well-being. How long do I have my parent? Will my parent change? Will they be able to speak anymore? Will we still have the same relationship? There is if it's an adult child, there is an acknowledgement that none of this fear is appropriate to discuss with a parent. And so all of that emotion, in psychology, it's called, we deflect. And we deflect it onto a safer place, which is probably relatively speaking, a healthier member of the family, which is my sibling who I've been pissed at for 20 years. And I can, in a way, sort of vent some of this emotion, even though that isn't really the source of what I'm feeling at this time. And by the way, that's why you'll see that those arguments are so unproductive, because that isn't really what's going on for me in those moments. What's really going on is I'm terrified. And I'm terrified about this situation and this news I just received. And it is, should I say, easier? I don't know about easier. It's safer for sure to make myself believe that all this emotion that is so scary and out of my control is about this other thing that is within my control and someone else's fault.
It's pretty much human nature, right? To react in those situations. We've all done it. We all can probably recollect moments where we did that. So what happens then when caregiving pulls someone back into the whole family circle that they had spent years trying to stay away from? Siblings, spouses, partners, old alliances, old conflicts, and now a parent who needs care in the middle of all of that historical gamish of stress.
We need to do some expectation management here. And we also need to do some utilizing of the support system. So caregivers who have, like you, the caregiver that you're describing, in my imagination, I'm seeing someone who's worked very hard on themselves, maybe gone to some therapy, maybe created and nurtured really meaningful relationships in their adult life that are more satisfying than their family relationships. That adult then has done a very good job, whether they realize it or not, creating a support system, a healthy and reliable support system. That adult now in a crisis needs to manage expectations, you don't really get to be surprised anymore when you go back into your family of origin and everyone's acting the way they've always acted. You don't get to be surprised anymore. You'll probably get your feelings hurt and you'll probably become angry and resentful, and all of those are normal, non-emergency human conditions. But the two things that we need, that probably that caregiver needs to hold in mind is, if you have a, lame sibling who never contributes anything and doesn't help and lets everybody else do the work, then go into this crisis expecting that same behavior. Now, of course, you're still going to get upset about that. It's still going to frustrate you. But any kind of expressing that frustration to that sibling or trying to work it out inside of the family is not going to magically work now. It didn't work in the past. It's not going to magically work now. That's a phone call for your support system. Now you go to your spouse, your best friend, your pastor, whatever sort of support system you have worked so hard to create. That's where we take those emotional expressions. In the family, it is now business. It's now business, and you just have a bad business partner. That's all. And we all hopefully have developed skills to work with a bad business partner.
I think that's brilliant. What I'm also hearing is, after all the work that you've done and all you've built for yourself, when you're back in the room, it doesn't mean you have to change and revert back. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the concept of differentiation that you've alluded to in the past, where you differentiate yourself from the environment and say to yourself that I can exist here. The new me, if you will, can exist here, and I don't need to become the old me in this dynamic.
Yeah.
Is
No,
that
that's
correct?
right. Yeah, that's a part of differentiation. The piece that I would add, you might even, this might appeal to you too. The piece is maybe the central drive of that concept of differentiation is that when we grow up together and when we are living under one roof, it's hard to differentiate. It's hard to distinguish which feelings belong to me and which problems belong to me. The ability to differentiate is the ability to walk into a family situation like that and be able to say to yourself, that does not belong to me. This emotion, this does not belong to me. That's my brother's problem. I'm okay. My brother's clearly not okay, but I'm okay. This problem that's being brought to me, it shouldn't really be brought to me. This is not mine to deal with. Here are I can differentiate between what belongs to me in terms of emotions and problems and conflict and what doesn't belong to me. In a way, it's sort of detached. There's an emotional detachment that's very healthy. That you can look at things from a more cerebral, I guess, more logical perspective, in terms of compartmentalizing what you're going to take on and what you're not going to take on. And in my world, we consider that a pretty healthy, adapted human.
I really agree with you on that. And I think it potentially, with practice, it can be a very powerful tool. And maybe even a powerful tool for caregivers in different dynamic scenarios. Maybe not just working within the family, but working within the healthcare system, trying to navigate that for their loved one. And again, not giving over their strengths within the broken system and assuming all of those weights and perils and everything else, but trying to keep partly reserved, as you say, compartmentalized a little bit away from it without being compartmentalized in the pathologic sense.
Right.
A lot of caregivers don't start by asking, what's the right care plan? They're actually asking, am I a bad person for dreading what this is going to cost me? What is underneath that guilt when they can already see the family battles and emotional strain ahead, just as they're about to scrape the surface of what do we need to do here?
I don't know if this will surprise you or not, but it's you just described a moment that all caregivers can relate to. Like, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling about this. Why am I not more loving and more considerate? Why am I not a better family member? And what is underneath that is wisdom and maturity. What is underneath that is usually an adult who is not naive, who is aware of what this is going to entail, who is aware of this burden that they didn't ask for because they've been on the planet for a while and they've seen this movie and they know how this one ends. They know how this goes, right? So what's under that dread is a mature adult who's going, oh, this is it. This is what this is going to probably look like. I've seen this with my friends and other loved ones, and now it's happening to me. Not wanting a burden is a psychological concept as old as time. Freud called it the pleasure-seeking principle. You avoid pain, seek pleasure. Not wanting a burden is the most natural human tendency. I think it must be buried down into our bone marrow. That is the most natural tendency that we have as humans. I don't want this burden, no matter what the burden is. Not wanting the burden of caretaking your family member, I don't know how to say this loudly enough. Not only are you not a bad person, you are completely normal and probably more realistic than the average person, understanding what has just fallen onto your lap. Now, acting out in anger and resentment and harming family relationships, that's another story. Talk to a therapist and your support team about that. But the not wanting the burden, we talk about that all the time in family therapy. There's a comforting thought I can offer you here. I hope, maybe. It's comforting to me. I don't know if it's comforting to everyone else. I love talking about this concept. I love talking about this concept of burden. Because when we think about burden, we think about, I never want to burden anyone. I would hate to be a burden on someone. We don't like the idea of burdening one another because we don't like the idea of causing discomfort and distress to one another. But actually, let's take it to like a marital level. When we are exchanging our vows, in my opinion, if we're doing it the right way, yes, there's the love, and yes, there's the romance and the pretty flowers and the nice dress. Yes, there's all of that. That's all lovely and that's all fun. And yes, there's going to be beautiful times together and we're going to go through this life and some of it is going to be rosy. But when we are exchanging our vows, I hope that what we're really doing is saying, from a quite unromantic point of view, okay, husband, I see all of you. I see that when I say yes to all the good parts, I'm also saying yes to your mother. I'm also saying yes to your baggage. I'm also saying yes to your flaws and your weaknesses. And there will be times in our marriage where you are going to burden me. I don't want it, but I accept it in exchange for you accepting me as your burden too. Right? That there is I know I just sucked all the romance out of a wedding, but exchanging of vows, but there is a transactional loveliness to that. This kind of like, actually, you are kind of a pain in the ass, and I'm kind of a pain in the ass. And so when you need to lean on me, I will say yes, but then that means I also get to lean on you. We get to burden one another. In my world, we call that interdependence. It's not dependence and it's not independence. We don't like either of those concepts. We like interdependence. For your listeners who are parents, when you have children, those are burdens. Holy cow. Those are the biggest burdens in the world. And they are burdens that I want and that I accept. And it's a pain in the ass to stay up with you because you won't go to bed. And that's not the fun part of the relationship. But I accept the burden because I want all the rosy parts of the relationship. And because I hope that you'll take on my burden when I'm old and aging. I hope that there is a unromantic but beautiful transactional aspect to our relationship. I'll burden you and you burden me, and maybe it'll even out in the wash over time. But if we learn to accept these burdens in the hopes that we will also be able, then we'll be free to burden someone else with ourselves and our lives. If we can kind of, I don't know, it's a comforting thought to me. If we can kind of like zoom the lens out and take the 30,000-foot view in those moments, yes, you are being burdened right now. But you know what? You're going to burden somebody else. And maybe in sort of a weird cosmic spiritual way, we all end up sharing an equal portion of the burden if we're all taking care of one another at different points in our lives. I know,
it
it's kind of
depends on
cheesy.
family dynamics and how individualized each member of the family is. Because I think a lot would say in this age of toxic individualism, that sort of continuum of shared burden may not necessarily float as well. But one thing I did hear, and I think it's really important to emphasize about the wedding vows and the taking on of each other's burdens, that's probably the most holistic way you can stay loyal to the relationship, and the commitment to the true relationship and what relationship means is by that assumption wholeheartedly of each other's burdens in the name of the relationship.
Yeah. I have a lot to say about toxic individuality. I like your term. I wish we'd be doing a little bit more, just as a society in general. I do wish we'd be doing a little bit more, a little less what's in it for me, and a little bit more, hey, somebody needs some help.
Yeah, I think we've touched on that in several episodes, and it's certainly something that pops up on the grid now pretty regularly. So how do siblings then take the next step to making care decisions when they don't agree on the family history or even on who each of them has been in the family and their roles? Is it possible to coordinate care when the conflict isn't just about the parent who needs help, but about everything each person believed happened before the big medical crisis?
Yeah. You're calling to mind for me two families that I have in my practice right now that are, one of them is demanding a lawsuit against the hospital and all the build up to everything that happened, and the other one is saying, "Oh, there you go again. You're always so aggressive, and just don't we have enough to deal with, and you're adding this to our problem and wrongful death and all this kind of stuff." The first Well, I guess it's a piece of advice. The first piece of advice is for siblings to coordinate care. There needs to be an acceptance of at least some level of messiness. That this isn't going to run like a well-functioning board of directors. It's going to be messy, and that's okay. That's okay. Families are messy. I've never met a clean family in my life. I don't want to. Families are messy. I am in favor when we talk about coordinating care. So I used the word triage a minute ago, and in my therapy, I have to triage problems. You can imagine when you have 5 people sitting in your office and there's 800 different dynamics. I have to choose which 2 are going to get my attention today, and the rest I'm not going to be able to attend to today. That's
Exactly.
similar. Yeah, it's similar with the family crises. You have to triage problems, and so for coordinating care for a medical crisis, that's on top of the list. And so what we need to do, as messy as it sounds, and yes, it probably will cause a little bit more damage, but I argue repairable damage down the line, you probably need to name a team captain. I believe in a structured approach to coordinating care, and that team captain, and this doesn't always work. Like I said, it can be messy. The team captain is responsible for ultimately making the decisions, hopefully in somewhat of a democratic process, right? Hearing from the other siblings, but that they are the decision maker. And yes, in difficult families, that will cause more damage. But that damage that it causes, and this is where we go back to the triage idea, is less emergent than the medical crisis that needs to be dealt with. And so whatever, and I hate to be dismissive about it, but whatever damage is caused because one of the siblings is being bossy and isn't handling it the way that the other one wanted to, and and whatever old sibling dynamics are being drawn up, and they're so controlling and they're arrogant and they think they know everything, and all that old sibling stuff that can be brought up. I heard myself say you're causing more damage. I'm not even sure about that. You might just be sort of salt and peppering some old damage that's always existed that you have time for. We have time to deal with those problems. I think it's important to have some kind of decision-making hierarchy, someone who will ultimately make decisions, yes, messy, and yes, hurting feelings along the way. But I think that decision maker then has a responsibility to make a promise to the other siblings that this stuff that is being drawn up will be dealt with timely, next month. Within the next 6 months, next week, whatever it is, whatever the crisis, whatever timeline exists for that family, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the sort of the power position that, yes, I see that I have the power. So in exchange for this, I promise you, we will finally talk about that thing that happened at our cousin's wedding. We will finally talk about the family secret we've all been holding. That I promise you, in exchange for this decision-making power, we will get to that, and not someday. We will get to it in December. We will get to it at Thanksgiving, whatever that is.
So what I'm hearing from you then is, with the election of this sort of captain, at least temporarily, to get the family through the medical crisis of the loved one, you're also setting some terms of reference on the table for this ad hoc structure to actually function, with some trade-offs to be able to maybe achieve some healing in the process, or at least not worsening the wounds.
Yeah. That'd be ideal. And yes, as I keep saying, it's messy, but we don't really have a lot of options here.
I mean, is part of what makes sibling conflict so painful in caregiving is that the parent who now needs the care may actually be the person who helped create those roles in the first place?
1,000%. 1,000%. Yes. Yeah. There's well, it turns out parents are human beings, and they are quite flawed. And we can come up with a million scenarios here, but in one family you might have favoritism. In another family, you might have actual harm, harm done between a parent and a child. In another family, you might have a chauvinism or a sexism, a gendered trauma of some kind. And in each of those families, the parent themselves that either caused or contributed to the sibling the parent they never let the siblings be siblings. They stood in the way of a brother and a brother, or a sister and a brother, stood in the way of those siblings being able to develop that oh so important sibling relationship. There's quite a lot of resentment there. I will tell you though, that ailing parent, whoever the the criminal parent who caused that problem in the first place, the fact of the medical crisis or the fact of the aging often is healing for the siblings, depending on the family. But if the siblings now, just practically speaking, will probably have to talk a lot now, right? And they'll have to talk. They'll have to be in communication a lot about day-to-day decisions, and if if everybody's local, who's going to run to the store to get this thing that our dad needs or whatever it is, and who's going to go to the doctor's appointment. So there's a lot more kind of boring, sort of superficial logistics communication that's happening. The more that happens, the more the superficial communication happens, the more it lays the foundation for siblings to talk for real, to start really talking. Also, because the aging or sick or ill parent, because they are in a weakened position, their abuse or harm or whatever it was is likely to be easily visible. This time, visible probably to the sibling that wasn't harmed, or the sibling that was favored or whatever. What I have seen, and it's hopeful to me, what I have seen is that in adults, when they actually get a front row seat, oh, this is wow, mom really is awful to you, or wow, the difference in the way our parents treat us, or whatever the original crime was, the siblings come together. You finally, after all these years, if you're the aggrieved sibling, you finally, after all these years, get what you wanted. You wanted your older sister, your older brother, your younger brother to see. And they go, oh, wow, I see. Now, this is something that actually has happened in my own family. Like, wow, this thing, I thought you were just complaining this whole time, all these years. I see it now.
I mean, that's a huge acknowledgement. And do you think that weighs even stronger than just the adult children sometimes still waiting for that ill parent to finally let them out of the role they've been carrying for years? Like the sibling acknowledgement may actually be more powerful?
That it's called validation, and it is more valuable to us than striking gold in California. Having especially a sibling, somebody who was in the trenches with you, you can get validation from a therapist, and that's nice and everything, but the therapist doesn't really know. And you can get validation from a friend, and that's nice, but to get it from somebody who was in that bedroom, who was in that kitchen, who sat at that table, that is more valuable to us than unobtainium. What was that called in the movie Avatar, right? It is a precious metal to us, and that's why it is sometimes the salve, the ointment. That's all we don't even need to resolve the conflict or the trauma anymore. We got what we needed. We got validation from somebody who was right there with us, standing next to us.
Sounds powerful to me. Folks, we're going to take a break, and in the tradition of the podcast, get a chance to field some questions from our illustrious production team. This is a surprise tradition, Angela. We get our producers involved, and they're in the background processing. They're part of the team, and they're part of the think tank. So we have this nice tradition of getting them involved.
Well, actually, it's where I get free therapy from all of our guests. That's the joke.
That's why you wanted me to do the podcast, Fred. I knew there was a motive.
This is the bonus.
All right, Frederick, tell me all about your mother.
Funny you should ask.
Okay, we've dealt with a lot of those issues so far, so I'm going to open this a bit more broadly. But there's something that you said earlier in the show. You were talking about managing expectations. And as someone who's gone to therapy and had tried to do a lot of work to sort of escape from like some of the dysfunctions that I grew up with in terms of my extended family, I had this thing that I kept doing, and I just sort of more recently recognized the pattern is that I would go back into these relationships when I would visit, and I would always show up with this blank slate. And I would give everyone like the benefit of what it felt like the work I had done. And I would just expect them to sort of mirror that in some way. So I'd go back and I wouldn't expect that they would act the same. And I wouldn't expect that they would necessarily repeat some of the, more toxic behaviors and which caused, all of the problems to begin with. And that seems to me like it's almost the definition of emotional insanity is going back and expecting the same, getting the same results, getting the same interactions, but somehow expecting it to be different and repeating that over and over and over again. So I'm wondering, I can't believe that I'm the only person that may not be managing the expectations properly, but when you unlock that, it really frees you in a way to go in and expect, okay, this person's always behaved this way. They've done things that have hurt me over and over and over again in very similar ways. And I'm no longer going to go back and expect it to be different. Maybe you could just expand on that a little bit for our listeners.
I'd love to. You're breaking my heart a little bit because you are reminding me right now of myself, my clients, my friends of mine that have gone through therapy, and we go through our own growth. So let's talk about therapy right now. That's one form of growth. There's lots of ways to self-improve, but that's one way. So we go through therapy, and I'll speak for myself and maybe speak for you. I don't know. Maybe speak for other people. But what I was conscious of during therapy is I was working on myself, and I was examining my old ways of being. I was examining why I had my old ways of being. I was examining what it was that I was wanting from my dad, what it was I was wanting from my sister, and kind of letting go of those wants and letting those needs be met by myself or my spouse or my friend, other parts of my life. And I did all this work, and I was conscious of that. What I was unconscious of, and you can tell me if you had this too. I didn't know it until I kept banging my head against the wall. I kept going back. What I was unconscious of was I had this tiny little hope that I wasn't giving any voice to because I didn't know it was there for a while. And that tiny little hope sounded like this: I'm healed. I'm better. Now they'll change.
That's exactly
now
it.
They'll see. Yes. Yeah. And that little, whatever that is, that little flicker of hope or that little baby delusion that we have, like, okay, I've done all of this work on myself. We have to admit to a hope or an expectation that all this work we've done on ourselves will be the thing that makes our family finally change, that makes them see us, that makes us love us, that makes them love each other, that makes them behave better, that makes them see the error of their ways. And that's what I'll say about kind of managing expectations is coming to sort of a grim reality and acceptance that, oh, this is work I've done on myself. They didn't do any work on themselves. So I can be better, but if I'm going to go put my arms around a crocodile and give it a hug, it's still not going to feel good. It's still not going to feel good. And in these situations that we're talking about today, right, where you realize, oh crap, I'm going to have to hug a crocodile for the next 6 months. Okay, well, the crocodile didn't go to therapy and become a swan, right? I did. I became a swan, but they're still a crocodile. So when I hug the crocodile, it's going to hurt, right? And so that's maybe a way of understanding what I mean by that very deep managing of expectations is just because we did all the work and we did good work and we actually are different and we are changed. That's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It's not. It doesn't mean that now they will see the light. On the contrary, it means that we know they won't see the light, but we can handle ourselves differently. We can take on pain differently. We can manage pain and stress differently.
I don't know exactly when I realized that the work I had done on myself wasn't going to transfer or fix anything external to myself, but it took a lot of kicks in the teeth. And I think, do you think it's just a matter of just repeating that pain until you get it? Or how do people come to the realization?
Gosh, great question. I guess everybody comes to it differently. If you have a good therapist, the therapist can prep you, right? The therapist can coach you and say, hey, listen, you're going back for Thanksgiving. We know what to expect, right? I think a few kicks in the teeth, that's one way that people can come to that realization. Or
when the therapist just becomes so bothered by the fact that you keep repeating the same patterns. They kind of want to pull their own hair out, and there's like a little bit of a breach
Yeah.
of protocol where they're like, listen, you can't go, stop doing this. I had that kind of moment.
So you're talking,
Yeah.
you're talking about when the therapist kicks you in the teeth. That we do that for our clients. We kick him in the teeth sometimes. Sometimes we go, what's the matter with you? Right? Like what's going? But yeah, there's those moments of weakness that turn out to be gifts. That too. This isn't really what you're asking, but I'll tell you kind of where my head goes. And I think for some of my clients who are religious, not all of my clients are religious, but I'm learn from watching them. If I take a page out of their playbook, they really work on forgiveness and not in like a Hallmark card way, but like in a really deep human way. And inside of the forgiveness is this mandate of acceptance, right? It is this, I understand that my father is the way that he is because of the way that he grew up, and he's not going to change it. And that hurts and it's harmful. And I accept, and there's a forgiveness flavor to that, right? And I noticed that my clients that can get there do better managing their expectations.
I think that's it. Like I was sort of looking back at like how these people grew up and the examples that they had, and they didn't have access to therapy. They didn't have access to any of these tools, and then sort of just coming to a radical acceptance of, could they really have done any better given their history? Probably not. So that I think that really struck a nerve with me when you said that. I think that's absolutely true. It's just getting to that point where you can accept and forgive.
Yeah. I wonder, Fred, whether forgiveness is actually the radical relinquishing of blame.
Exactly. Makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I want to write that one down.
Thanks very much for spending some time with that on me, or spending time on that for my benefit. Thank you, and I hopefully everyone listening gets something out of that too.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question.
We're back with Angela Caldwell, having an amazing discussion today about family dynamics. Angela, many caregivers tell us that they are carrying the burden while a sibling is effectively disappearing or has disappeared. And sometimes that sibling is absent from the work, but still has plenty to say about decisions. What does it do to the caregiver when someone opts out of the work, but not the opinions?
The peanut gallery. Boy, do we hate the peanut gallery. So, bad news. There's not a lot we can do there. Whatever, I will give you the sort of superficial answer, that whatever powers of ignoring you have developed over your lifespan, let's use those now, right? Go gadget ignoring. So that sibling, we all have that sibling that has a lot to say and nothing to give. You're going to become resentful and frustrated. You're going to lose your temper. You're probably going to say something you regret a few times to that sibling. It's okay. It's okay. Apologize later. Here's the thing, guys. Here's the bad news. You can't control other people. That sibling is going to do that, and they're not going to stop, probably. And the best thing you can do, I'm laughing because we all have that sibling, use your powers of ignoring as much as possible. Don't stonewall, don't block. Say like, thanks for the suggestion and I'll take it under consideration. And all the things that we say, go ahead and say the right thing. And then put your head down and go ahead with what you're doing. Let them, cast them in the lot of the audience, the peanut gallery. Take what they say with a grain of salt. You know what you're doing. You know the burden you're carrying. You know all the moving parts. They do not. Put your head down and keep moving forward. Sorry, kind of a bad news answer.
Well, but also, it means you keep your power, and the power you've built up if you've been through therapy and other things, you keep it within your control and within your domain, as opposed to relinquishing it by re-engaging in those situations. Now, estrangement can be chosen as a real form of protection too, but in caregiving, can it also become a way for some family members just to avoid responsibility while someone else just carries the whole of the care?
I suppose there are families where you could look at it like that. Estrangement is that is a very scary swamp. There are estrangement. Joshua Coleman writes so much and speaks so much on this
Yes.
stuff.
We
He's
actually had him
brilliant. I
on
hope you.
the show last week.
Oh, really? I really admire him. He's a person really too. So only listen to my answer for a minute. Really go listen to his answers. But estrangement is a terrible, terrible darkness. And in the rare cases, no family therapist is ever rooting for estrangement. Think about it. We're doing the opposite. We're trying to repair family relationships. There are rare instances where estrangement is the answer, but we want those to stay rare. We want those to be exceptions. And in situations where there is an estranged sibling or family member who is not going to participate in the care, there needs to be some compassion on their part, where I hate to use this word, where it's real, where it's legit, where the estrangement was the correct moral and mental and emotional psychological answer to a very, very severe problem. Unfortunately, and I know Coleman speaks about this a lot. I speak about it sometimes. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is an uptick in estrangement that is incorrect. That is mentally, morally, spiritually, emotionally incorrect. Where it actually speaks to more of an avoidance of conflict resolution and dealing with confrontation. We're using this word toxic with far too much freedom. We're using a lot of psychological words have made their way into the zeitgeist and they're misused all the time. Narcissist is misused all the time. Gaslighting is misused all the time. But worse than misusing the terminology is then using the terminology as some kind of justification to avoid an uncomfortable relationship or a relationship with someone who has divergent viewpoints or doesn't live the way that you live or that you don't approve of or doesn't approve of you. So it's a complicated question you're asking because in situations where there is, again, he probably has such better words than I do, but I'll use the word legit, where there's a legitimate estrangement. That should be rare. And yeah, probably considering the circumstances of what led to that estrangement, that probably is a person who's exempt from caretaking, probably. In the more common situations, though, I hear your question, and I'm not talking to dad right now when it's not really legitimate. Yeah, is sometimes used as a really cheap, dirty shield to not have to participate in the caretaking. Now, what do you do about it? Well, depending on your relationship with your sibling, you can call them out. You can have a fight about it. I always encourage people not to be afraid of fighting about issues because it's okay. We might say things that we regret in fights and we might raise our voice, but that's all those are all cuts and scabs. We can repair those damages. You can confront a sibling. You can choose not to. You can accept it as it is, that the sibling is being kind of cowardly, actually. And I bet if that's the situation, then that wouldn't be the first time you've had that thought about that sibling, or it would be sort of a repeat of a family pattern where you have a sibling who's kind of hiding from responsibility and accountability. You can be demanding. A team captain, you can delegate responsibility and be demanding and sort of bully your sibling into helping. There's some families where that actually does work. And then you can send your sibling 3 or 4 referrals for a therapist who can hopefully talk some sense into them.
Angela, when a parent needs care, are women still expected to step in as the organizer, the emotional manager, and the person who holds the family together, even if that is the same role they've spent years trying to escape from?
Yeah, we are still seeing a massive differential in the number of female caretakers as opposed to the number of male caretakers. It has everything to do with how we were socialized in Western society. Even now, so I have 2 daughters. They're 9 and 10, and my 2 daughters. We are a possibly obnoxious feminist family, and we're raising strong feminists in the world, and and we don't like the Disney princesses who are being saved by the Disney prince, and as much as I am trying to raise them to be strong women in the world and to defy traditional gender standards, well, you know what? When we need a new winter jacket and we go shopping at Target, can I tell you that the girls section is all pink and purple and unicorns, and the boys section is all blue and red and trucks and Legos, right? So there is still a genderized socialization that happens. Women are, I'm sure you guys are familiar with all of the sociology studies that came out of the East Coast about how teachers respond to girl problems and how they respond to boy problems on the playground and in the classroom. There's a little undertone in how we raise women of you should know better when it comes to meeting someone else's needs. There is almost a reflexive, automatic. Think of a dinner table where you've got brothers and sisters sitting around. There's sort of a reflexive. A parent, even me, a staunch feminist, will look to my daughters to clear the table and not my husband, right? So we are still. Unconsciously, we are still socializing women to be the caretakers and the administrators and the organizers. I would like to direct your listeners to Cheryl Strayed's podcast. It is the Dear Sugars podcast. And there's an episode there. You'll have to Google it. I don't know how to find it, but you'll Google the episode that is The Invisible Labor of Women. And she does an elegant job of discussing how women are raised and all of this labor, emotional labor that women do, invisible labor that women do, that, yes, to your question, we are still expected to do. And we can't help ourselves because a lot of us, because we're socialized that way, we get really good at it and maybe even a little controlling. And frankly, I don't want that guy, my brother, I don't want him in the room making the decisions because I've been making all the administrative decisions and organizing everything for as long as the family has been around. And so I'm going to continue it because I know better. And that's what I was told as a child, that I know better. Yeah, that I can do it better than you.
Now, in some families, caregiving is happening across some major deep political divides. What do those differences become, or why do they become so emotionally charged when a family is already trying to make decisions about care, responsibility, and trust? Now throw in the politics.
Yeah. We are in a time where the political has become personal. I don't know about you, but I hear people older than me talking about times when that was separated. I can't imagine that. I don't know about you. I can't imagine times where you could separate your political beliefs from your personal identity. Our political beliefs are founded in a very personal and intimate space. It's interesting because maybe what is different now from time to time, I don't know, you might know better than I would. What might be different than it used to be is the politics around healthcare. And our discussion today is about healthcare. And it's about access to healthcare and the cost of healthcare and the burden of healthcare and all of that. And so you can see how political arguments can arise around. I'm thinking of a family member screaming at another family member because they can't access some kind of healthcare for their aging loved one. Well, you voted for this, right?
Right. That's right.
And that coming to the surface, that's the impact of the political divides in family is, it's something new that I see in my practice. Let me take a quick little detour here. Because of the division that we see in the United States right now politically, I have gotten more than I ever have, and I've been doing this for 21 years, more than I ever have, I have gotten politically divided families. Those beliefs run deep. They are woven with religious beliefs. They're woven with personal beliefs. They're woven with relational and familial beliefs. So they come up all the time. But they are more resolvable than other differences I have come across. Those are my favorite families to work with because those differences in viewpoints we are able, because they are so personal, if I'm able to get a family to discuss not the belief, and if I'm able to get the family to drop the agenda, to prove your rightness and prove their wrongness, if I'm able instead to get the families to discuss why they believe what they believe, for real, why they came to this, it's almost always some kind of personal experience, some kind of way that I grew up, some fear that I have, some idea that I'm scared of losing, that I cherish, that is so important to me for these reasons. Almost always, I have been able to build a bridge. I'm not sure that bridge building can happen in medical crisis when there is a suffering adult, a parent or a family member that needs caretaking. I think that there needs to be, imagine your brain kind of cluttered with thoughts of medication and doctors and the oncologist appointment and radiology and like cluttered with thoughts. In order to become curious and interested about your siblings' political beliefs, you have to take a broom to it. It has to be you need some space. You need some clean space in your brain that's not cluttered. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think I'm a little pessimistic that there can be much resolving of those differences in an acute caretaking crisis. We got to be graceful in those. I coach my families to exercise grace, and then actually I make people do journal entries and really like decide for themselves, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? That this word grace and graciousness to other people. Can it be a pause button on that conversation? And kind of what I said before, with a promise to return to it, but not when I'm cluttered with medication and doctors and radiology appointments and care facilities and nurses, and not when I'm cluttered.
And fear.
And so, yes. Yeah. And so almost like a pressing pause on those political differences. But yeah, it's a long answer to your question. What is the impact? It's enormous.
Well, you speak to the fabric of it all, and people carry that identity with them day to day. I mean, I think back as a kid, we'd spend summers up at the cottage, and it was multi-generational, with lots of family members and extended family members. And I still remember one night, old Auntie Mary was really crapping on the Prime Minister at the time, had nothing good to say about the current government, but everybody woke up the next morning and said good morning to each other. It was it was a forum for an opinion, and there was some back and forth and disagreement, but it wasn't woven into how the next day was going to turn out in the days afterwards.
Yeah, I don't think that social media is doing
today.
100%. I don't think that social media is doing us any favors there, because now everyone feels, we're getting opinions at us like a fire hose, and we are expected to develop our own opinion and participate in the conversation. And we're influenced by the way this person's thinking and by the way that person's thinking. We go out into our families and we announce our feelings because that's what we're supposed to do on TikTok and on Instagram. And so yeah, it's I don't think that the socials are really helping us there. I think it was a lot easier when Aunt Mary did it one night, and then we have stuff to do the next day, and I'm not scrolling on Aunt Mary and all the Aunt Marys that there are in the world. I think that's those were, oh God, I hate being this person. Oh, the good old days. Those were better times.
So can a fractured family still coordinate care if they're not going to agree or forgive each other or repair relationships first? Like, what's the basic that needs to be in place for the family to be able to make it work, to caregive in that moment?
Yeah, they're not going to be able to do it without difficulty. So this might not be what you were expecting. What needs to be in place is a third party not related to the family. Depending on the size of and the age of the fracture, that needs to be a rabbi, a therapist, a social worker. That family needs to come to the most basic of agreements. And the most basic of agreements is that we are unable to function in a healthy way. We are unable to function in a way that helps our ailing person, the person who needs our help. We cannot help them because there is too much bad blood here. And I think the siblings or the children, whoever it is, the other family members need to relinquish control, not of decision making, but need to relinquish some level of emotional control or relational control to a third party. And that third party is, rather than, let's say that I have a lot of angst between my brother and me, we are not allowed to discuss what to do about mom, but I can talk to the third party and he can talk to the third party, and the third party can mediate some common area and help us make a decision about what to do about mom.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit and focus in on the caregivers. The caregivers who are grieving several losses at once. The person whose health is declining in front of them, the relationship they once had, or maybe the relationship they never got to have, and the family they hoped would show up in the moment. What kind of grief is that?
Mhm. We call it complicated bereavement. It is the cruelest aspect of the human condition. Having to grieve so many obscure things. Sometimes you've got one sort of obvious thing that you're grieving, and everything else is abstract and hard to define and hard for other people to relate to. It's complicated bereavement. I will say that my field and the medical field have done a fantastic job writing about this. That caregiver needs books and groups. Our both of those fields, the medical field and the psychology field, have put together organizations and causes and resources so that you don't feel alone. You will find that so many people can relate to these undefinables, these unnamables. More importantly, I hope caregivers would find that validation. Yes, this is complicated. This is not so simple. You're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. This is a heavy load. And working with a therapist or whoever can help you. This is a strange way to think about it. Compartmentalize your grief, even though it's all kind of layered. And help you grieve things one at a time. And what I don't mean by that is grieve this until it's grieved and you're done and now move to the next thing. But they allow space for, today I'm grieving the relationship. And then maybe next week, today I'm grieving what I've lost in my life, and grieve that. And the next week when they come, today I'm grieving my dad. I'm watching him, and to let the grief be compartmentalized that way. And as much as possible, allow, there's permission for you to pay attention to one piece of the grief at a time. But it is, that's a heartbreaking time in our lives. That is a sad time in our lives. And we need a lot of support and resources during those times.
One thing we've noticed, and I certainly read all the comments coming in on social media, but it's all about giving a name and a language to what's happening to you. And I think, as you aptly point out, the presence of community and connection through resources, and whether it's online communities or in-person communities, wherever you live, that all helps give that sense of language to what's happening and the shared collectiveness of a language that everybody speaks. And in an age of where everybody feels alone, that walk, putting one foot in front of the other towards community, once again, I think is massive, as you so well point out. Can someone be a good caregiver, Angela, when love is no longer the main reason that they're showing up?
Yes. Yes. Think of all of the doctors and surgeons and nurses and lawyers and who would not say that they love their patients, but are exceptional caregivers. If you do not feel love for the person you are caregiving, well, first call me, because I question the premise. I bet somewhere deep inside there's some love. But if you do not experience the more daily kind of pleasantries that you would hope for, if you are not happy with the person that you are caregiving, the task of caregiving is still the task of caregiving. You still have to do things with your hands and your phone and your computer. And those things can be done unemotionally and quite effectively.
But then when someone's caregiving from obligation instead of love, what has to be protected so care doesn't become resentment, self-erasure, and punishment?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you start to worry about adult or dependent abuse, right? That can happen. Sometimes we make that sound really nefarious, and we think of sons and daughters that are twirling their mustache and taking financial advantage of an ailing parent, and that is elder or adult abuse. But really what happens in a more realistic way in lots of families is that the abuse was never planned or intended. It just sort of came circumstantially out of anger and resentment. And yeah, yes, that if there is quite a lot of resentment built up between you and the person you are giving care to, that's a problem. And so you need to be very mindful about the decisions that you're making. You need to be mindful about You need to be mindful about the decisions that you're making, and you need fresh eyes on it. It's almost like it's almost. I think of it as a responsible action. If I am very unhappy and not feeling any kind of pleasant feeling toward my mother, but it's my job to take care of my mother, it would be responsible of me to have a third party check my work, right? To have someone that I trust, a friend, someone that I trust on the outside, checking and saying, you probably were pretty harsh to her right there. That was uncalled for. I think you're making that decision out of anger, not out of what's best for mom. Well, I don't know if that's the right course of action. I say rely on outside, unconnected parties for that. And see if you can, check your resentment, because that resentment can, in these circumstances, not always, but in these circumstances, that resentment can become dangerous.
I think resentment becomes more dangerous also when you feel like it's truly you who's doing it alone, and it's going to be for a long time to come. And again, building that team around you or that community around you can take away that sense of aloneness and maybe just detune that sense of resentment. So when does the goal need to shift from repairing the family relationships to truly creating a caregiving arrangement that's safe, clear, and workable?
Pretty immediately. I think that shift needs to happen. In fact, I was just thinking, is that the first order of business? That might be the first order of business, is to shift the relationships, or shift the focus. And maybe that's that family meeting that I really want all the families to have. Maybe that's the whoever the leader of the family is, let them be the leader. Let them call the meeting. Say, okay, we have a problem. Everybody sit down. And whether it's in a living room or on Zoom, let's have everybody sit down and let's shift focus. So here are the problems in our family that we're going to set aside for the moment. Don't forget that promise for one day being able to resolve those. But here's the problems in our family that will not be addressed right now. Here are the problems that will be addressed right now. This is so nerdy, but I'm a big diagrammer and list maker, and I in my vision, families are sitting down with a whiteboard and kind of writing down like which problems we're going to address with whom and how and at what point in the timeline.
So how do you do that when other family members seem more invested in fighting old conflicts than solving the immediate care problem?
Well,
can you be disinvited from a family meeting?
Yes.
Or-
Yes. Yes. You do it artfully. And if even that isn't working, even if you're using all of your people skills and all the stuff that Fred learned in therapy, right? Even if you're using all of that stuff, if someone is being disruptive to the process or causing some kind of obstruction in decision making, they're not invited. You treated them as an adult. They did not act like an adult, so they are dismissed from the adult meeting. Give a few chances, though. Here comes grace. Don't be so swift with the sledgehammer, right? So someone who's being defensive and unproductive, give them 3 or 4 chances, because also they're also scared. Their parent is terrifying them too. And we do not behave very well when we are scared and under stress. Give them a few warnings, give them a few chances, and then gently ask them to leave.
I think that's a really meaningful clarification. I'm really glad you said that. So, Angela, if someone listening today is the one who stayed, the one who's carrying most of the burden, and is the one trying to keep care moving inside this fractured family, what do you want them most to understand and stop blaming themselves for?
Mm. I really felt a sense of peace and warmth a few minutes ago when we were talking about this idea of burden or resenting the burden or feeling like you're a bad person for wanting this to go away or not wanting to help or not or all of those. I think I'm going back to that. I hope that caregivers in fractured families who are having all of what they think are the wrong emotions or the wrong thoughts to know that there is no such thing as a wrong emotion or a wrong thought. And we can't control our emotions. We can control a couple of our thoughts. We can control actions, and you're probably doing a great job because if you're in this role in the first place, it's probably because you were the capable and reasonable one. You're probably doing fine, but all of those feelings that you think make you an ungrateful child or that make you selfish or that make you any number of wrong or bad things, they don't. Those are profoundly natural human emotions that everyone has, and there's nothing wrong with you for having them.
I really wanted to thank you for joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation, and you've taught me so much. To everybody listening, grace, compassion, acceptance, self-directed compassion, and also compassion to everybody around the table. Because as a family, you are going through a difficult time. Don't try and go through it alone. Folks, that wraps up this week's episode of the Caregivers Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Ropaleski, and we'll see you next week. Caregiving inside a fractured family is complicated, and for many people, it can feel almost impossible to explain from the outside. This conversation helped you feel less alone or gave you language for something your family is living through. We're grateful you spent this time with us. And before you go, please take a moment to rate the Caregivers Podcast wherever you're listening. It only takes a few seconds, but it makes a real difference. Ratings help other caregivers find the show, and they help us keep supporting caregivers everywhere with honest, useful conversations like this one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to remind you of something important. The conversations you hear on this podcast are here to inform, to support, to spark reflection. They're not a substitute for professional medical advice, care, therapy, or crisis services. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or caregiver-client relationship between us. If you're facing a medical concern, health challenge, a mental health challenge, or a caregiving situation that needs guidance, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified professional who knows your story. If you're ever in crisis, please don't wait. Call your local emergency number or recognize crisis hotline right away. You deserve real-time help and support. The views you hear on this show, whether from me or my guests, are our own. They don't necessarily reflect any organizations we work with, or are part of, or have worked with, or been part of in the past. This podcast is an independent production. It's not tied to any hospital, university, or healthcare system. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most of all, for taking the time to care for yourself while you continue to care for others. I look forward to hearing from you.